like to welcome you to our third SAGE meeting. It is the final meeting before the debate, which will be held December the 13th. The purpose of this meeting is to highlight some of the salient points in the SAGE report and to give you, the people, an opportunity to voice your concerns, ideas, what have you, regarding the commission. And we have three speakers this evening. We have Ms. Renee Ming, Senator for the PLP, MP Wolf, Commission, and MP Walter Robin. Mr. Commission will be giving an overview of the main features in the SAGE report. Ms. Renee Ming will be speaking to matters such as pensions, and Mr. Walter Robin will be speaking to, in particular, privatization as set out in the SAGE report. The speakers were allowed to, because we're trying to, I guess, bring the facts that have been highlighted in the SAGE report to you, especially for those of you who have not been able to get a copy of the SAGE report. And they have picked areas where they think are of interest and that you might have a wish to participate in. But that doesn't preempt you from asking one or two questions outside of the remit. I just would like to go through what basically, in terms of your participation, we would like for you to do. Once all three presenters have presented, and they each will have approximately 15 minutes, once that part of this meeting is completed, then you will have your opportunity to ask questions, make comments. We want to give everyone an opportunity to speak, so we will hold you to approximately, when you get up and ask a question, about 3 minutes, because we want to give each person an opportunity to give some sort of input. What we will ask you to do is to make your way over on that side, because at that point I will move to that side and I will be able to give you the mic so that your questions get heard by everyone. So is that clear? Okay. Again, I would like to thank you for coming out, because this could possibly impact you if many of the items that are highlighted in the SAGE report are indeed implemented. So thank you for taking interest in what can possibly have a profound impact on you. And at this point in time, I will be passing over the mic, and the show will get on. So thank you for coming out. Oh, one housekeeping matter. I would like to thank the president of St. George's Cricket Club, who was kind enough to provide this venue, and I might add for free, because he wanted to make sure that we would be able to have something down here in the east for the eastern end of the island. So thanks to Mr. Neil Painter for allowing us to have this venue.
Thank you, Levita. Good evening, everyone. First, allow me to acknowledge and offer sympathies to the family of Dalton Hooks Burgess, Sr. of Hamilton Parish. Mr. Burgess was also the father-in-law to my brother Dane and father to his wife, Troylene. Our hearts go out to his wife, Bunny, their children and grandchildren. Mr. Burgess passed away last night after struggling for some time with illness, and I'm sure many of you would know him. He's also the brother of Winters Burgess. Both of these people were very long-time, loyal supporters of the PLP, for example, and very staunch icons of Hamilton Parish. Secondly, I just want to thank you all for coming out tonight to this town hall meeting. These meetings are intended to get feedback from the public with respect to the SAGE Commission's final report. Our party and our parliamentary caucus have not yet arrived at a definitive opinion of the report in question. but you can be rest assured we are studying the document with the aim of separating the wheat from the chaff, if you will, to see which of the overall recommendations that we can support. In line with the above, we are also looking for your feedback so that we can be better informed as to the range of opinion that exists in the community on the number of critical issues addressed in the report. Most people will agree that after the last 10 to 12 years or so, that both the public and the private sectors in Bermuda have experienced an economic roller coaster, the likes of which Bermuda has not seen for a very long time. Indeed, we may need to go back to the mid to late 1800s to draw any meaningful historical analogies in terms of the economic boom which saw real GDP double in less than a decade, to be followed by an economic downturn of almost biblical proportions that has produced an island-wide economic hangover that we are still trying to come to terms with. Few are willing, despite the more than 3-year decline in GDP of the economy, to assert that the worst is even behind us. In fact, there are some brave souls who would assert the opposite proposition and say that we have still not reached the proverbial economic bottom as yet, and therefore that the elusive recovery is still some way off. Certainly the news over the last few days that the recently announced redundancies at HSBC and at the insurance brokerage Hardy's offers us no cause for optimism in this regard. Of course, this only compounds the challenge, mathematically speaking, for the government, as their promise to create 2,000 jobs during their first term remains a moving target. And in the midst of all that we have seen, the final report of the SAGE Commission, which will be characterized as a life preserver to some, or rather as a bitter or indeed poisonous pill by others, depending, I guess, which side of the shared sacrifice continuum you are on. The SAGE report is designed to offer a blueprint containing recommendations to tackle the quite significant problem associated with having a government that the report contends has essentially grown beyond the country's ability to afford it by way of a shrinking revenue base over the last few years. Case in point, as the report highlights, the government since 2005 has consistently spent more than it has earned in terms of revenue. Thus, the thinking goes, as outlined in the report, that if we are to address the issue of ongoing unsustainable deficits of approximately $300 million, which are informing the growth of overall government debt, which as of the beginning of the next fiscal year in March will be just over $2 billion, we must not only squeeze greater efficiencies and productivity from government, we must also downsize it by sharply reducing personal and benefit costs. With the current staffing level of over 5,000 employees, as outlined by my colleague MP Dennis Lister at last night's party-sponsored town hall, and by union heads, if the majority of recommendations contained in the report were enacted, particularly with respect to privatization and outsourcing, this could result in the reduction of the government workforce by approximately 1,700 to 2,000 white and blue-collar workers across a number of ministries. Notwithstanding the fact that the government has repeatedly claimed that there will be no redundancies of government workers. The report itself seeks to tackle all three objectives: greater efficiencies and productivity gains on the one hand, and staff reductions on the other, along with root and branch reforms to the three primary pension schemes and the GEHI healthcare scheme that government has responsibility for, by offering a suite of recommendations contained in the aforementioned report. More symbolically, it also has called for the reduction of the size of the cabinet, along with the reduction of the size of Parliament. For example, with respect to the privatization and outsourcing provisions in the bill, excuse me one second. For example, with respect to privatization, the report envisions that privatization and outsourcing authority would be established to implement the privatization and the outsourcing of identified government assets. Prime candidates for privatization being airport operations, civil aviation, highways management, maritime administration, public lands and buildings, waste management, water and sewage management. Finally, the report envisions that privatization, for example, will not take effect for approximately 18 months to 2 years. In the case of outsourcing, the authority, once it has been established, because they do intend to operate and to establish an authority to actually to implement these recommendations of outsourcing recommendation, the outsourcing aspect of this plan would include conservation services, corrections department, GEHI and health insurance department, the accountant general and the Ministry of Health and Seniors, human resources department, marine and ports, Ministry of Tourism Development and Transport, parks, which is part of the maintenance, I should say, Ministry of Environment and Planning, public lands and buildings, public transportation, transport control, which is under the Ministry of Tourism Development and Transport, youth, sport, and recreation, which was spoken to last night, and vehicle and equipment operations and maintenance, which is part of the Ministry of Works and Engineering. In closing, I think that there are a number of issues that are emanating out of this report that bear consideration. As highlighted in the previous town hall that took place last night at Dalton Tucker, the question we all need to ask is, what do we want from our government in terms of programs and services, and what are we prepared to spend to obtain them? There are some, I would suspect, who would say that the only public services funded by the government should be internal security, such as police and the courts, and just about everything else from pensions, trash collection, transportation, education, health, and social services should be privatized or outsourced. Secondly, while the SAGE Commission report is virtually silent on the issue of the need for revenue growth, we think it is short-sighted and counterproductive not to address that issue. After all, it has been the decline in revenues which have contributed mightily to the fiscal position that the government finds itself in and the country at large. The PLP, for example, has called for, in light of the above, that a RAGE Commission, originally touted by party member Anthony Richardson, be established to tackle the revenue side of the equation. In other words, how can we foster demand and see business growth and jobs in an economy that has shown a distinct lack of it in a number of key economic sectors? I think that most of you will agree that we cannot cut ourselves to fiscal solvency and thus economic health, and that only by reestablishing strong revenue growth can we ameliorate the fiscal challenges now facing us. We think that this too is a conversation that belongs in the here and now. Lastly, there are also two elephants in the room that the report is basically silent on. One, the report fails to acknowledge that any likely reduction in earnings or job losses on the part of government workers that may take place over the next year, for example, will only further weaken economic demand in an economy that is showing little real strength, as noted. Concomitantly, the report also fails to point out that from a macroeconomic basis, that the time to implement many of its recommendations, outside of those seeking greater efficiencies and productivity, insofar as one would want to, should occur only when the country has entered a cycle of renewed economic growth, so that, for example, the affected workers are more easily absorbed into a growing, more dynamic private sector economy. Secondly, with respect to the issue of shared sacrifice, we recently saw a poll published in the Royal Gazette, conducted by Mind Maps, which indicated that there is a growing perception that businesses are not sharing in the sacrifices that are disproportionately falling upon the unemployed, the working poor, the middle class, and more specifically, Bermuda's black community. Which brings me to the really big elephant in the room. Is it just me, but has no one noticed that when watching the nightly news and the file footage of unionized workers exiting one of their meetings, that virtually all of them are black Bermudians? Does no one think it a little odd that in 2013, in a multiracial country such as Bermuda, that over 90% of the overall government workforce, blue collar and white, is comprised of black Bermudians? The question I am raising is, what historical factors produce this anomaly in a country that has a significant white minority in terms of its population? And we already know that the ongoing recession has placed a disproportionate burden upon black Bermudians by way of contrast to other racial and/or ethnic groups in the country. The statistics confirm this. In addition, let us not be so short-sighted to forget that it was the trade union movement in Bermuda that created a pathway to the middle class for thousands of Bermudians over the last half-century and measurably contributed to the quality of life and workplace benefits and conditions that we have all in some way enjoyed. Therefore, we must be careful of unleashing a process that could, and I said could, have the result of eviscerating the unions in this country and thus leaving working people at the mercy of unbridled capital. Does that mean that the report and its recommendations should be ignored? No, far from it. it would be folly to do so. But it does mean that this is a very complex issue that we must approach. Our consideration of it in a way that acknowledges that there is more to consider than readily meets the eye, or that which is contained solely in the report in question. It needs to be addressed in a way that we can deal with the complexity that's inherent in the report and find a just and lasting, sustainable solution to the complex challenges that confront us today. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Commission. Just some more housekeeping. I just want to acknowledge other MPs who are out here tonight listening to this same presentation. I want to acknowledge the leader and deputy leader of the party. I want to acknowledge former Premier Paula Cox. I do believe I saw her come in. I would like to acknowledge former MPs, Mr. Arthur Pitcher, Mr. John Barrett. I think that's it for former MPs. And current MP, Mr. Michael Scott, coming all the way from Somerset. And I do believe I saw Senator Robin come. He did return, Senator Robin. And I believe that's it. And again, I want, for those who just came in, I want to welcome you to the SAGE meeting down here at St. George's Cricket Club. And the next speaker for this evening is Senator Renee Ming.
Good evening, everyone. With protocol having already been established, I just want to say welcome to the mighty St. George. I would not be remiss in having a meeting and not mention something about St. George's, because there's a unit who's listened to me in the Senate. I don't think one Wednesday is going by and I haven't mentioned something about St. George's, something that's happening, something that's going on. So for those of you from the Western end especially, welcome. My job tonight is to give you information on pensions, benefits, and the glide path. This is based on facts, on what has come out of the SAGE report, and all I'm doing is giving you some information, and what I anticipate from you, I guess, will be some feedback when we get to the comment side of it. We're just going to first of all start by saying that we have 3 pension plans right now with the government. We have the Bermuda Contributory Pension Fund, known as CPF. We have the Public Services Superannuation Fund, PSSF. And we also have the Ministers and Members of the Legislative Pension Fund. The CPF, which is the Contributory Pension Fund, is the social insurance scheme into which all Bermudians contribute. They contribute benefits set by the Parliament. PSSF is a pension plan for employees of government and government creditors. Ministers and Members of the Legislative Fund is a pension plan for government ministers and members of Parliament and senators, and it has an automatic cost of living increase. And then we have 2 benefit plans. The Government Employees Pre-Retirement Lump Sum Leave Benefit, which is a benefit to for certain eligible government and Quango employees upon retirement. And then we also have the Government Employee Health Insurance, which is known as GEHI to most of us. The government employees and dependents are entitled to participate in GEHI program upon retirement. The government pays 50% of the premium. The Contributory Pension Fund, we're going to start with that one. The findings under the SAGE Commission were that it's underfunded by $2.066 billion. And that's as at August the 1st, 2011. It's on course to run out of funds by 2047. The ratio of working persons to pensioners is decreasing. It was 5-2 in 2005 and 3 in 2021, and it'll be 1-5 in 2046. The recommendations that the SAGE Commission has put forth are to increase the contributions by 3% in excess of benefits. So what that means is someone who earns $50,000 a year, who's paying 3.3% of the income, will begin to pay 6%. To raise the eligibility age to 68, and this would be done over a phased-out period of 15 years. and then after 15 years, raise the retirement to the age of 70. I'm going to talk now about the Public Service Superannuation Fund. The findings by SAGE are this, that is underfunded by $973 million. And this is as at March 31st, 2012. It's unsustainable, and it's on a course to exhaust the funds by 2043. It offers better benefits than comparable defined benefit plans, and its calculation of benefit early retirement survivors and cost of living increase. The recommendations from SAGE, the SAGE Commission, are change the benefit from final salary to the last 5 years, raise retirement age and penalize early retirement, spouse not automatically covered, 10% option, no further cost of living increases, and the benefit is fixed for the duration of the beneficiary's life. The Legislature Pension Fund. The findings from the SAGE Commission are that it's underfunded by $23 million, and that's at March 31st, 2013. The fund is currently unsustainable. It offers better benefits than the PSSF plan, with faster accrual and 66% of the salary of mixed salary payable. The recommendations from SAGE are that we immediately freeze the MMLPF. No new entrants, no new benefits to accrue. Replace it with a defined contribution plan and reduce the benefits to current beneficiaries, raise the age to 65, and no cost of living increases. The government employees pre-retirement lump sum. The findings from the SAGE Commission: at present, the government provides a pre-retirement lump sum benefit to certain eligible government and Quengo employees upon retirement. The recommendations from the SAGE Commission are: the SAGE Commission recommends that the collective bargaining agreements governing the payment of this benefit be renegotiated to provide the following. Determine the accrued benefit for each active employee as at a specified date based on the current rules, and freeze the benefit to be paid to active employees when they retire. SAGE estimates that this will save us $10 million in future cash outflows. The government employee health insurance, GEHI. The findings of the SAGE Commission are: it's 100% underfunded at $269.4 million. So it has 41% retirees, 59% active. At present, GEHI provides coverage for employees, retirees, and eligible dependents. The government costs are up 137% over the last 10 years. The recommendation of the SAGE Commission is that we fix the amount paid to retirees at current figure, cease providing health benefits for new retirees, 7-year grandfathering. Retirees can stay in plan by paying 100% of premium, and SAGE predicts changes will save us $169 million. Glide path. One of the recommendations that has come from the SAGE Commission is that we put ourselves on a glide path. I guess it's more of a plan on how we can reduce these numbers and the deficits that we have today. So the recommendations following like the schedule of reductions that's been put forth for 2014-2015 is $65 million. For 2015-2016, it's $80 million. 2016-2017, $85 million. 2017-2018, $90 million. And it give us an actual total savings of $320 million. What this means for us is that in 2014-2015, and the recommendation would be to abolish all unfulfilled posts, reduce non-personal expenses, reduce grants and contributions, reduce personnel, terminate poor performers, require those above age 65 to retire, incentivize early retirement, scale reduction of salaries to meet the current savings targets. So for 2015 to 2018, we would see a repeat cycle every year during the budget process, and privatization not to take place for 18 to 24 months. And then they speak about a multiplier effect. SAGE acknowledges the existence of multiplier. Every dollar reduction in spending will cause $1.28 in reduction in output in the Bermuda economy. To meet this target, SAGE thinks that we will have revenue growth of 3% in spending, and this will be calculated by $235 million over a 4-year period, from $984 million to $749 million. And according to the multiplier, $301 million will be removed from the economy, which is a reduction of 1,344 jobs. So it's a very serious picture that we're sitting here and we're thinking about. But like we said, this is to give you information and then for you to provide comment to us. Thank you very much for allowing me this time.
Thank you, Renee, and we just want to acknowledge MP Lawrence Scott and also our party chairman, Mr. Maynard Deal. And we will now hear from Mr. Walter Rodan, who will speak specifically on privatization and outsourcing.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here in St. George's. Happy to come here and be involved with the process of education and enrichment, because it's very important that the public, if I can say just casually, to get their head around what this particular report is proposing. It's by no small measure a significant document, and potentially will impact the very structure of government and society as significantly as when in the 1960s, when essentially the government structure that we have was devised once we got constitutional government. So it stands to be as important as when we got our Constitution back in the 1960s, and to transform how Bermuda is governed over a period of time. So it is not insignificant. And certainly we are here because we feel it's important to bring this information to yourselves. For those of you who haven't had the benefit of a printed document, it's only available online at the moment, unless you have the benefit of resources that allow you to print off a document. You may not have seen it yet. So at least now we can help you start the process of getting familiar with this. I am aware that the Bermuda Industrial Union, as a part of their civic duty, is providing printed copies for a price of $5. So those of you who perhaps would like to get a copy, and I've only heard about this the last couple of days, you can certainly contact the Bermuda Industrial Union, and they can provide you with a printed copy of that document. As has been said, I am focusing on outsourcing and privatization. That compiles about, from pages 78 to 114 of the SAGE Commission report, a significant amount of the report, which perhaps alludes to the attention that and the priority that the members of the Commission put to this particular activity, and how they believe it's going to impact how these findings and can be ultimately put in place. The report states there is ample evidence that some areas of government functions are inefficiently delivered, and there are areas of government that should not be undertaking in the first place. So there are some areas of government they feel that government should really not even be involved with. And it's a part of the rationale that they feel that privatization, outsourcing should be considered. There are a number of clear and compelling opportunities, they believe, to use privatization and outsourcing to reduce the cost of government. And they have a couple of chief recommendations, some of which have already been mentioned. One is the establishment of this privatization outsourcing body. So that will be a body that will actually begin the process of looking at the structures of government and reviewing them to see how those components can be outsourced. And it's about 18 areas of government that they have at least designated in the recommendations to actually consider being put at this process. But the actual privatization and outsourcing authority, they propose to create it as an independent body with 7 appointments by the Minister of Finance, 2 of which will be from the Trade Union Congress, and will be charged with reviewing all government activities and to determine whether government continues in those activities to be justifiable. They also put a provision that essentially that committee will not be a permanent one. It will last for about 6 years, and then it will be eliminated. So they essentially are going to be tasked with, over a 6-year period, with carrying out this process. There are about 7 departments that have been targeted for privatization or being placed in the clango according to the report. And my colleague has listed them, but I will go through them again. Airport operations, civil aviation, highways management, marine administration, public lands and buildings, waste management, water and sewage management. And there were 11 departments they considered specifically for outsourcing: conservation services, correction department, GHI, and the health insurance department, human resources of government, marine and ports, the parks, parts of the parks department, public land and buildings, public transportation, transport control, youth sport and recreation, and vehicle and equipment operations and maintenance. Now, the next slide I devised so that you can get a picture of the numbers that are involved with these particular areas of government that they have designated. The first slide is the privatization slide, and you can see the amount of money that would be involved if they were to privatize these particular services, around just over $84 million. Now, on the other side, and that's the current expenditure, so government will be looking to relieve itself of that potential expenditure over time with privatizing these services. The other column I thought was important, and I've only calculated the losses because, frankly, that's what they're really focused on. It's not so much that of the revenue, because this report has nothing to do with revenue. It has to do with getting rid of expenditure and losses. So the bottom red number of $49,775 is the calculation of all of those losses. I'm sorry, million. That's the losses that would be gotten rid of. And that would amount to around 497 personnel, according to the report. The next slide looks at the outsourcing list and the list of departments that will be targeted for outsourcing. And that comes to around $182 million in expenditure. And the liabilities or the losses that the government will be potentially looking to get rid of is about $157.2 million, with 1,392 jobs being impacted by the outsourcing. Bear in mind that although the report outlines this, this is just kind of like their plan. They may find that there are more departments that they might be ideal to be privatized or outsourced after this particular outsourcing and privatization authority gets work and gets its work done. They may find more, but for the sake of the report, that's what they identified. Now, the Stage Commission identified what they believe was the most objective and strategic approach to considering what they were going to do in this area. And they dealt with 2 questions they presented to themselves. Can government afford to provide this service? Is this program or service necessary? Those are the 2 questions they felt that were most important for them to consider. And the commission felt that these 2 questions, if these 2 questions are kept in the utmost, as privatization and outsourcing opportunities are considered, decisions are likely, in their view, to be made in the greater good of the community. Anyone, you can, decide whether that will be the case. But that's what they said. This is what's in the report. This is what they have rationalized as how they look at privatization and outsourcing. And if they approve that particular approach, they felt that this would be achieved. Now, just so that you understand a couple of definitions, in case of those who are not familiar with those concepts, privatization and outsourcing are there, and those are the two definitions that were listed in the actual report. Privatization, process of transferring ownership of a business, enterprise, agency, public service, or public property from the public sector to the private sector, either to a business that operates for profits or to a nonprofit organization. Outsourcing means the contracting out of a business processes to a third party, in this case, a public sector function of a service to a private entity. Now, very interesting now, I think we've seen one example of that with the Tourism Authority, which might arguably could be considered like almost a hybrid privatization outsourcing experiment to some degree. Not pure privatization, but certainly it seems to be a combination of both, because the government still has significant control and responsibility for what the Tourism Authority will do and what it will produce. But they've outsourced a lot of its function, essentially the function of running tourism, to this authority. So it's almost like, but they consider, at least in their argument, that the authority is a private, independent body. So it's almost a hybrid of these two concepts. The commission then set aside those programs and services they believe should be owned and provided directly by the government. This is some of the approach that they took, believing they could be provided efficiently and effectively. Now, I put a note there because they didn't really list all the programs and services that they thought should not be privatized in the same detail. I find that quite interesting. They kind of listed everything they thought should go, but they didn't get into much detail or discussion about, well, why not to privatize certain areas of government. They also set aside all departments and activities involved in the formulation of policy and strategy. That gives you some idea of what they thought shouldn't be privatized. So policy formulation and areas of government that deal with the strategy of government, and those that are the responsibility directly of those who are elected and also of the civil service executive. And the commission determined that any recommendation should create a number of opportunities: provide net operating savings for government, provide enhanced service levels to the Bermuda public, reduce physical plant required by government. Essentially, some assets that government has, they figure that if government doesn't need them, they can sell them off and get some money for. Reduce government debt and other long-term liabilities. Encourage new small business development. And the commission expects that any privatization action to provide reliable and consistently priced long-term coverage of the private sector requirements. So they hope that this will be achieved by privatization, because ultimately whatever services are privatized, those services should be continued in a way that is acceptable to the public good or to what you as the public want. So they're saying there that there should not be any reduction in the quality or level of service by the privatization process. They also look at the potential to absorb current public sector staff into new private sector functions or entities. And as you know, that's what's going on right now with the Tourism Authority. They are devising a way in which some of the staff, or as many of the staff as possible as the authority will decide, will be moved from the Department of Tourism and the ministry to the new authority. So that's some of what is going on right now. So that body is kind of the experiment that reflects what this section of the report is talking about. Monetize government assets for sale or lease, buildings and equipment. And they also listed what they felt were drivers for privatization, in reference to this is what the drivers they would list against each one of those departments. And if you go into the document where I've essentially summarized what is in it, each department that they've targeted, they list these drivers and try to see, well, how it balances between for and against. I guess trying to find a way to sort of, in a very clear way, show merits for and against privatization for each respective department. So they had drivers for privatization, and you see what those are. They also had outsourcing drivers, and they go through the same process for the outsourcing. Is it currently available in the private sector? Against, will there be loss of government control in some way that will not be beneficial to the public? So they have drivers for both outsourcing and privatization, of which they put up against each of the departments they like identified. And the commission stated that although policy and strategy are the responsibility of government, leaving the execution to be privatized of any of these services and outsourced, that the government must remain accountable for sustainable provision of required service to the public. So it's very interesting that they say this, because what they're saying, they want to get rid of services, but government will still, and it's not clear how this will be done, because once something is private, it's owned by someone else. But that government will still have the responsibility for making sure that those services are done properly. Let me give you an example. What if they privatize trash collection, which is essential to all of our lives? That may be owned by a private company and essentially won't even be controlled by government. But what the report says is that government will need to have a way that it can ensure a service like that will continue to be delivered at a level. Transportation, like buses, there's been talk about the buses being privatized. That government will have to ensure the same thing for buses. But again, it may be a private company. We may not have any say as a public if they choose to get any feedback from us on them keeping routes. They may decide to drop certain routes that are not profitable because they're in it to make money. So these are some of the things that will come up in the process of considering privatization and outsourcing. But one has to understand is that usually once the service is sold to a private owner, it's theirs, and they can control and guide what's happened with it. And that may not always be to your benefit or to your satisfaction, but there will have to be a way devised if this plan goes through on how the government is going to have that relationship with those entities on keeping certain levels of service that the public finds acceptable. And the commission expressed concern about, one, seeing no strategic plan for proactive management of government assets or coordinated delivery of public services. Many functions, they said, that were reviewed tended to be resided within operating silos of the civil service. And any attempt to outsource or privatize them within the current structure would be piecemeal. So they don't think that the current structure of government even allows for some of these things to happen. So they would have to change. And that's, I think, where the authority's role would come in, is to taking control and having the say in what happens with these entities. Now, the final recommendations that they came to around, generally, these are the general recommendations around privatization and outsourcing, was that the Bermuda 60/40 rule may have to be modified to accommodate the need for foreign investment for much larger entities that might be outsourced or like privatized. Now, bear in mind, we are currently in a market where there isn't a lot of capital for a lot of things. At least that's what we're told. So if some of the larger sectors of government were going to be privatized, the likelihood is that foreign investment would be required. Particularly, you talk about transportation, and you can see the numbers related to investment in buses. I mean, myself and Mr. Burgess, who are Minister of Transport, know that our bus fleet, the cost to maintain that fleet is in the tens of millions of dollars. Would a private investor locally be able to take on that solely? Likely not. Or even waste management, the running of the incinerator, or even creating another system that might deal with our waste management. Hundreds of millions of dollars in capital investment would probably be required. Likely to need outside investment, so 60/40 rule may need to be varied to attract that. Great care should be taken in the creation of monopolies, similar with what Belco is, or what a transportation or even a waste management company might be a monopoly if it were privatized. Since competition, they believe, should be a key driver of innovation to reduce the cost and enhance service. And where these structures are best, because there may be some services that can only be done by one operator, that Bermuda doesn't have the capacity to have multiple service providers in the private sector. The government should maintain a pricing through a regulatory authority like we do now with power, like we do now with some other services. Yeah, and like telecoms are all regulated as an industry. So energy and telecoms are regulated by an authority. Now, here's another one. Assistance should be sought from the UK government, which has a track record of successful privatization and outsourcing, which is a very interesting statement because I think I'm going to be very interested to hear more about that from the government because for those of us who actually pay attention in this world, there may not be much truth to that. But this is their recommendation. And they say that the UK should help us with this because of their success in privatization. So that may be a question you as members of the public might want to ask for them to show you examples where these processes have been successful. Create the authority, which has been talked about, the Privatization and Outsource Authority, before actually starting. As you saw in the report, there's an 18 to 24-month lag before this is to start. They would want this authority set up first to do some work. And I suspect they would want the British or some other persons to help us with that before it gets going. Outsourcing, there is considerable scope for outsourcing services, and a number of functions have already been successfully outsourced. A government strategic planning process must be implemented, they feel, within the authority that should continuously review all government entities. So they're really looking to put a considerable amount of power under this particular authority to actually ongoingly review government services to, I guess, determine their efficiency, as well as to see if they merit any changes and if privatization or outsourcing of them would be of use. Where compelling outsourcing opportunities are identified, every effort should be made to transfer government staff currently handling those functions to the outsourcing partner. Maybe an opportunity to support ambitious government staff. This is an idea that they said that perhaps government staff themselves can essentially take on those services as private entities, and they could then create a contract with the government to provide those services. So in a nutshell, that's the summary of that section, page 78 to 114 of the report. It is clearly a significant part of the report, and it's very important, I think, you understand that this may be where the government is looking to actually take the steps to really get rid of a lot of the expenditure and meet that $320 million goal that they say is necessary for us to get our government back on track. Thank you.